Hello everybody, welcome back to a brand new video. Today we're doing the President Hamilton Timeline, Episode 9, going through the years of 1965 to 1985. Starting it off, we do have one note. In the 1960 election, instead of LBJ running, we're just going to have George Wallace run. Since LBJ was a closet supporter of civil rights, I was actually debating this with the commenter in the comments, and we talked about it a little bit. He said that LBJ was a closet supporter, which is true. I thought he would just run on an anti-civil rights agenda because the establishment of his party would actually push him to do so. But instead, we'll just have someone like George Wallace run, since he was actually anti-civil rights and wasn't a closeted supporter. So that would just make more sense, though the electoral map doesn't change that much. Going on to 1965, President Nixon will pass the Civil Rights Act of 1965. It's actually a bit more quote radical than it is in our timeline. He would also establish the Environmental Science Service Administration, sign the Social Security Act of 1965, which establishes both Medicaid and Medicare, and he also signs the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which bans literacy tests. 1966, the 1966 New York City transit strike would occur. Nixon would sign the Uniform Time Act. He would veto the Freedom of Information Act, and he would establish the Department of Transportation. 1967, Nixon would ratify the 23rd Amendment, which will be presidential succession. It's the 25th Amendment in our timeline, but in this timeline it's the 23rd Amendment. We would also see the 12th Street Riot, and Nixon would sign the Public Broadcasting Act of 1967. And we go on to the 1968 election. Ronald Reagan would be nominated by the Republicans, a very popular Republican governor out of the state of California. And the Federalists would nominate Richard Nixon, who isn't all that popular, but isn't unpopular. He's kind of in the middle. Blacks love him just for his fight for the civil rights movement, but Ronald Reagan would push that he didn't do enough. And the black vote would be very split between the two. Nixon would win it about 55 to 45, somewhere around there. He'd win it by a good chunk of margin, but he still wouldn't, or scratch that. He would win it 52 to 48. I'm sorry. And Reagan would probably sweep most of the South because of the white vote. And due to the vote splitting between Nixon and Reagan with the blacks, Reagan would do much, much better in the South than many people would expect. And he would defeat Nixon to become the 32nd president, though he would barely win the popular vote. Going on to 1969, the Reagan tax cuts would go into effect, so we essentially get the Reagan presidency a good, I'd say, 12 years earlier. 1970, Reagan would sign the Public Health Cigarette Smoking Act, and he would also declare war on drugs, and he would sign OSHA into law. Going on to 1971, Reagan would ratify the 24th Amendment, which makes the voting age 18. This is the 26th Amendment in our timeline. Going to 1972, we have the election between Reagan and Federalist Governor Spiro Agnew, who is the former governor of Maryland at this point. Spiro Agnew would have a lot of skeletons in his closet, and Reagan would, exploit them, and plus Spiro Agnew would just be very unpopular, only pretty much losing in a ginormous landslide to Ronald Reagan, only winning his home state of Maryland, as well as the Terror District of D.C., so Reagan was re-election in a landslide. Going on to 1973, President Reagan would establish the Drug Enforcement Agency to combat the war on drugs. He would also pass the Education of the Handicapped Act, which would establish, special education. And he would also pass the Endangered Species Act. 1974, there's nothing noteworthy, as well as in 1975, as we go into the 1976 election. Before that, Reagan would veto the Copyright Act of 1976. Veto, not pass. Note, there is no Federal Election Campaign Act, since there is no Watergate, so there would be no need for there to be some sort of federal election campaign reform. So Republicans nominate Ronald Reagan's Agriculture Secretary, Jimmy Carter, who is very popular within the Reagan administration, and the Federalists nominate the current Speaker of the House, Gerald Ford. This timeline, Gerald Ford would be pushed by the establishment to run, as he is one of the more prominent Federalists out there. But the election is pretty much a mirror of the election in our timeline, where Carter beats Gerald Ford by winning less states to become the 33rd President of the United States. 1977, the Great Lakes blizzard of 1977 occurs, as well as the New York City blackout of 1977, and President Carter would establish the Department of Energy to handle the energy crisis. Going on 1978, the Great Blizzard of 1978 would occur, and Carter would sign the Humphrey-Hawkins Full Employment Act, which gets the federal government more involved when it comes to employing Americans. And President Carter would establish the Department of Education, but we would still go through the Iran hostage crisis. And we have the 1980 election, where Federalists nominate the former CIA director, who was the CIA director under the Nixon administration, George H.W. Bush. And he would go on to defeat Republican President Jimmy Carter, as Carter would be super unpopular. He was unpopular around this time in IRL, so he would be unpopular again now. And so he would win in a landslide, become the 34th president, though it's not as bad as it was in real life, since Bush isn't all that popular compared to Ronald Reagan. Going in 1981, the Iran hostage crisis ends. Bush will be given a huge boost of popularity for that, as well as the Bush tax cuts being implemented. 1982, there is nothing noteworthy, as well as in 1983. Going on to 1984, we have the election, where Republicans nominate Florida Governor Ruben Askew. Is it Askew or Askew? I don't know. And Bush, very popular, however, doesn't do as well this time around, since he's running against a more popular Republican, though he still ends up winning at 316-222 to win re-election. And going on to the final year in this episode, we would have the Iran-Contra affair occur, but this time it would be more mainstream, since Federalists have bigger say and have the majority in the House of Representatives, where they would seek to impeach President Bush for the Iran-Contra affair. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Go follow my Twitter at Chaotic Politics. This is the Chaotic One saying, peace.